Hey guys, it's Miss Vinson. Today we're going to finish up our discussion of elasticity. Now let's talk about elasticity of supply, income elasticity, and cross-price elasticity. First off, elasticity of supply is very similar to elasticity of demand, but instead of measuring the strength of consumers' response to a price change, we're measuring the strength of producers' response to a price change. When price goes up, how much does quantity supplied go up? How strong do producers react to something getting more profitable? Or if the price goes down, how strong do producers react to something becoming less profitable? Now, to find the elasticity of supply, all the rules you learn with elasticity of demand still apply. They're all the same. So to find your elasticity of supply coefficient, you would use the midpoint method exactly as you have been practicing with elasticity of demand, except now price and quantity supplied move in the same direction. So you won't have to do absolute value at the end of your midpoint method because your answer will already be positive. Price on the bottom and quantity supplied on the top will have the same signs. They'll either both be increasing or both be decreasing, so your answer at the end of your midpoint method problem will already be positive. So our scale is still the same. Greater than 1 is elastic, less than 1 is inelastic, and then exactly 1 is unitary. You'll be glad to know that everything on the graph also applies. So the flatter a supply curve, the more elastic the supply, the stronger the reaction by producers. The steeper the supply curve, the more inelastic the supply, so the less response by producers. In fact, we even have things like a perfectly inelastic and a perfectly elastic supply. A perfectly inelastic supply curve would be straight vertical. A perfectly inelastic supply would be where producers have no response to a change in price. Usually this happens whenever there's a limited supply of something. A perfectly elastic supply just means that suppliers will be willing to produce infinite amounts of something as long as they receive a certain price. However, you will definitely have more questions about elasticity of demand than elasticity of supply. So just everything you've practiced with elasticity of demand, just know that it applies to producers when we talk about elasticity of supply and the supply curve. Now let's talk about income elasticity. We know that elasticity refers to the responsiveness of something. So income elasticity measures the strength of consumers' response to a change in their income. So in these situations, we're looking to see, well, if people get paid more, how does that affect the amount of stuff they're buying? Or if people get paid less in their paycheck, how does that affect the amount of stuff that they're buying? Now, since we're measuring something completely different, since we're measuring a response to a change in income rather than a response to a change in the price of something, we're gonna have a completely different scale for income elasticity. So let's work a couple of examples and we'll practice using that scale so you can get the hang of it. All right, for our first example, suppose that general income levels in the area rise by 15%. Well, if people are getting paid 15% more in their paychecks, we might see the demand for motorcycles increase by 30%. Now remember what we're going to do with these numbers. The thing that changes first goes on bottom and the reaction always goes on top. So the thing that changed first was that people got paid 15% more. So we're going to have a positive 15 in the bottom of our division. Their reaction was that they went out and bought 30% more motorcycles. So we're going to have a positive 30 in the top. When we divide these out, positive 30 divided by positive 15, we're going to get a positive 2. Now, we used to take absolute value because the sign didn't really tell us any new or helpful information. But now with income elasticity, guys, you have to pay attention to both the sign and the number. So let's look at this number with our income elasticity scale. You can think about your income elasticity scale kind of like a number line. Instead of greater than or less than 1, now we're looking at really greater than or less than 0. So we're going to have 0 in the middle. We're going to have a side on the left to represent our negative numbers, and we're going to have a side on the right to represent our positive numbers. Now, if your income elasticity coefficient is positive, then we're going to call those goods normal goods. The reason why we call goods with a positive income elasticity normal goods is because it is normal behavior to buy more if you get paid more, and it is normal behavior to buy less if you get paid less. So if you have two positives in your division, that's going to give you a positive number. If you have two negatives in your division, that's going to give you a positive number. So a positive income elasticity coefficient refers to normal goods. A negative income elasticity coefficient refers to inferior goods. Inferior goods tend to be cheaper, lower quality products. These are things that you buy more of when you get poorer. Or if you get richer, these are the first things that you ditch, all right? I'll give you an example of those in just a second. First, let's take a look at our motorcycle example. Our income elasticity coefficient was a positive 2. Now, since it's a positive number, motorcycles in this example are considered normal goods. But that 2 is a pretty big number. We can actually subdivide our normal goods into different categories. If your answer is positive and it is greater than 1, that means it's on the higher end of that scale. And higher end items tend to be referred to as luxury items. So if you end up with an income elasticity coefficient that is positive and specifically greater than 1, then that means that that item can be classified as a normal good and even more specifically a luxury. If you get an answer that's positive but it's only a 0.5 or a 0.6, then that means that the item is a necessity. Well, you can kind of think about it. When we talked about price elasticity, anything greater than 1 was more of a luxury, right? Anything less than 1 was more inelastic, so that was more of a necessity. So in our case, motorcycles can be classified as a normal good and even more specifically, a luxury. Now let's do another example. Let's say people's income falls 40%. Now that's hard times. When we see people get paid that much less, we may see the demand for ramen noodles go up by 60%. I'm talking about the little brick of noodles with the salt packet, right? So if people are getting paid significantly less, man, people still gotta eat, so we're probably gonna see the demand for ramen jump up. Now, the thing that changes first goes on the bottom. That was people getting paid 40% less. So we're going to have a negative 40 on the bottom. But the reaction goes on top. Well, people reacted by buying 60% more ramen noodles. So a positive 60 is going to go on top. Now, when we do a positive 60 divided by a negative 40, we're going to get an income elasticity coefficient that is a negative 1.5. That sign and the number both tell us something important. First off, the sign is negative, so that means that we can classify ramen noodles as being inferior goods. The reason why they're inferior is because people are buying more of these cheap products when they're getting paid less. Probably if people got paid more, the first thing they would stop buying would be these cheap ramen noodles and they'd actually buy some real quality food. So it's an inferior good, and the number is 1.5. The number tells us how strong of an inferior good it is. So that's a pretty big number. So we definitely could classify ramen noodles as being a pretty seriously inferior product. Finally, our last type of elasticity is cross-price elasticity. With cross-price elasticity, we're really trying to figure out the relationship between two goods. We're really trying to figure out if these two goods are substitutes or complements for each other. So what we're trying to actually measure is how a price change in one item affects the demand for another item. Now suppose that we're talking about Coke and Pepsi. Let's say the price of Coke goes down 20%. So Coke is now 20% cheaper. Well, when people go to the store and they see that Coke is 20% cheaper, they're going to buy more Coke and they're going to buy less Pepsi. So let's say the demand for Pepsi falls by 60%. So when we divide these numbers out, the first thing that changed was that the price of Coke went down by 20%. So that would be a negative 20 on the bottom. The reaction was that people are buying 60% less Pepsi. So we would have a negative 60 on top. So when we have a negative 60 divided by negative 20, we're going to get a positive 3. Now you can't use your elasticity of demand scale for this. You can't use your income elasticity scale for this because we are measuring something completely different. So guys, you have a scale that's specifically for cross-price elasticity. Now, the sign and the number are both important, especially the sign with cross-price elasticity. Your cross-price elasticity scale is going to look like a number line, very similar to your income elasticity scale. So you're going to have 0 in the middle, you're going to have your negative numbers on the left-hand side, and you're going to have your positive numbers on the right-hand side. Now take a look at Pepsi and Coke. We know they're substitutes, and we ended up with a positive number. So any of your coefficients that are positive are going to tell you that those items are substitutes, that they can be used in place of each other. So if you get a positive cross-price elasticity coefficient, then you know that those items are substitutes for each other. The number tells you how strong of a substitute they are. Now, 3 is a pretty big number, and we know that Coke and Pepsi are pretty strong substitutes for each other. But what if our cross-price elasticity is negative? If your cross-price elasticity is negative, then that means that your goods are going to be complementary goods. They're going to be goods that are bought and used together. Suppose the price of cereal goes down 10%. So cereal is 10% cheaper. I love me some cereal. Well, not a lot of people like to eat just dry cereal, so if cereal is going down 10% and people are buying more cereal, they probably want to buy more milk to go with that cereal. So we might see the demand for milk go up by 20%. So the thing that changes first goes on the bottom. The price of cereal went down by 10%, negative 10 on the bottom, and people reacted by buying 20% more milk. So we have a positive 20 over a negative 10. Now, when we divide these numbers out, we're going to get a negative cross-price elasticity coefficient. We're going to get a negative 2. The negative sign tells us that these goods are complementary goods, and the number tells us how strong of complementary goods they are. So at 2, they're pretty strong complementary goods. They're frequently used together. Now let me give you a little trick, because the number one thing that students get confused with income and cross-price elasticity is they end up flip-flopping the scales because they both look like number lines. And sometimes, even if students remember that cross-price elasticity is a different scale, they'll get their complementary and substitute goods flip-flopped as to which one is positive and which one is negative. So let me give you a little trick. If you imagine your kindergarten or first grade classroom, probably there was the alphabet on top of the board at the front of the classroom. A, B, C would be really on the left-hand side of the board, right? Because it comes first in the alphabet. And so think about complementary goods being on the left-hand side of your number line. The left-hand side of your number line is where all the negative numbers are. If you continue down through your alphabet, then S is going to be further to the right. Well, that's great, because substitute goods are going to be on the right-hand side of your number line where the positive coefficients are. So just think about your alphabet, and that can help you keep your cross-price elasticity scale straight. And this concludes our talk about elasticity. So remember, we have 4 types of elasticity: elasticity of demand, elasticity of supply, income elasticity, and cross-price elasticity. Alrighty guys, hopefully you can keep these scales straight. With a little bit of practice, I'm sure you'll have it in no time. So until later, see ya.